You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. This was what we were tracking 5 years ago today. Typhoon Haiyan, the Philippine name Yolanda. It became the 8th strongest storm in Western Pacific history, and would also become the 7th deadliest in the whole basin, and probably the most challenging storm the Philippines has ever had to face. Haiyan was also the second most destructive storm in real terms, in terms of buildings that were completely obliterated by the storm's passage, second only in the basin to Typhoon Vera. Tonight, or this morning in the Philippines, we look back on Typhoon Haiyan, how it affected us at the time, and what we think about it today, with the Force 13 team discussing and analysing the storm 5 years after the fact. It's a very memorable time for me, as it is for many other viewers, not only in the Philippines but around the world, as to what occurred in the first week and the second week of November 2013, 5 years ago now. And Force 13 was tracking what first became Tropical Storm Haiyan.
Update 1 on Tropical Storm Haiyan, which is currently located out in the open waters of the Western Pacific, not too far from Chuuk, and moving towards the west, towards the rest of the Micronesian islands. Currently with wind speeds of 50 miles per hour sustained, a pressure of 989 millibars. Current position 6.1 degrees north, 148.3 degrees east. And you can see here the storm's expected to move towards the west-northwest generally over the next few days, intensifying all along the way, and possibly peaking as a Category 4 storm before making landfall in the Philippines. By the looks of things right now, it appears that the storm may make landfall in the central region of the Philippines, the Visayas region, and could also affect Luzon in the next 5 days.
It looked like it was going to become a considerable threat, a significant typhoon. Nothing could prepare anyone for what eventually became of the storm. Its rapid intensification phase, even when it got to Category 5 status, I distinctly remember that it probably wasn't going to intensify that much more. Bhopal happened the previous year. We were on guard for maybe 175 miles per hour again. Most storms do tend to weaken just a little bit before they strike land, but Haiyan of course didn't.
Update 4 on Super Typhoon Haiyan, which is currently located in between Palau and the Philippines now, with wind speeds sustained of 175 miles per hour and a pressure of 911 millibars. Current position is 8.6 degrees north, 132.8 degrees east, and the storm is expected to close in on the Philippine Islands over the next 24 hours, possibly making landfall in the Visayas region as a strong Category 4 typhoon. At the moment, the forecast calls for a landfall intensity of 155 miles per hour, but we'll see about that as it happens, and obviously moving through the Philippines as a strong typhoon and then out into the South China Sea, making a final landfall probably in Vietnam still as a typhoon. So signal 2 warnings in effect right now for sudden.
Haiyan kept going, strengthening all the way to 195 miles per hour before striking the Philippine island of Leyte and then onto Tacloban. And of course, Force 13's analysis has the storm a little bit stronger than that, 200 miles per hour, according to our numbers based on the satellite appearance. A lot of people have complained about how there isn't any reconnaissance planes that go into the storm. This storm really would have benefited massively from those computations and the information and the data that come in from those planes. They haven't been doing them, at least the US hasn't been doing reconnaissance missions in the Western Pacific since 1987. But it would have really benefited in this storm to find out exactly what its pressure would have been, and we really don't know how strong the storm actually was. And if it happened today, it would be exactly the same. We still wouldn't know.
On Super Typhoon Haiyan, which is currently located over the Philippines right now, the Visayas region, with wind speeds of 185 miles per hour sustained and gusts of 225 miles per hour. Right now with a pressure of 903 millibars. Current positions 11.0 degrees north, 124.8 degrees east as of 2 a.m. UTC on November the 8th. Now obviously it's a very strong storm. It did make landfall pretty much at its peak intensity. It reached 195 mile per hour winds with gusts of 235 miles per hour earlier today, which is probably the strongest landfall we've ever seen in the modern period. The storm's expected to move towards the west-northwest, possibly sustaining Category 5 intensity all the way until it reaches the South China Sea, and then begin to weaken into a Category 4 storm, and then possibly still be a Category 3 major typhoon by the time it makes landfall in Vietnam in about 48 hours' time.
I described in my personal logs during this storm that it really did a number on me. Of course, Force 13 at the time not only did the videos, but it was half and half balanced between video making and the website updates. We did both of them pretty well, I must say. And if it happened today, Force 13's coverage, of course, would be much different. We'd be doing live coverage probably 24/7 for maybe a 2 or 3 day period because of the magnitude that Typhoon Haiyan possessed. Now, some of you may be aware that I'm a little bit of a typhoon historian, have been very much of late, doing a lot of reanalysis, and there is one potentially similar storm to Haiyan, a Category 5 typhoon we believe that struck in the first week of November on Leyte as a Category 5 at landfall with a pressure around 919 millibars. Would have been a very similar storm to Haiyan, but a bit weaker and maybe a little bit smaller. That storm also killed over 115, could have been a lot more, we really don't know. Injured over 15,000 and caused very severe damage in the area. These storms probably do happen every so often, maybe a little bit more than once in a generation perhaps. It's really difficult to tell. We've got 100 years since the last storm that was like Haiyan, and then who knows how long it might be till the next one. It could be 5 years, it could be 500. We really don't know what the average number is, and that's probably what we have to always remind ourselves of when we're looking at these 1 in 100 year storms or 1 in 1,000 years, when we really don't have that much of a record to base that number upon. But nonetheless, all we can hope for is that we will be much better prepared for the next Haiyan. Well, to talk about it with me live now is the team. We've got quite a few people with us right now to talk about Haiyan 5 years on. Also, just to mention, we are calling Cyclone Alcide as a Category 3 in the Southwest Indian Ocean. We may be able to touch on that a little bit later on, but I guess we may as well begin with Farm if we can. I know we've got a few mic problems over there, but he is in the Philippines. Farm, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Haiyan is one of the most it's the strongest storm I've ever experienced in my lifetime, though it never directly hits me, and I've experienced really strong winds, and I think typhoon force winds I've experienced, but I know some of the relatives in Visayas and Southern Luzon that their house got almost destroyed by the storm, and
Yes.
I'm also receiving some stories from my friends in Tacloban City whose their house are destroyed by the surge, and they're almost really depressed at the time. But at least today in Tacloban, their place are already a bit normal, and though the development is quite slow. But anyways, I believe Haiyan is the strongest typhoon to made landfall in the Philippines. And though I think some other storms like Typhoon Gay or Typhoon Tip have been stronger. But also, I've also heard stories about Haiyan being related to climate change, which is already ongoing, which is I believe exists due to human actions, and I hope this climate change will be solved eventually. And that's it for me.
There's a lot of I had one or two people over there who I knew as well, who were in Cebu at the time, I believe, and widespread damage reported over there as well. Who's trying to speak there? Oh, I can hear myself. You'll have to turn me off, whoever that is in the background. Oh well, we'll come back to everyone shortly. If you've got any comments or questions for us whilst we're on the air talking about this very historic storm that occurred 5 years ago to the day, pretty much to the hour, because daylight was just arriving in the Philippines on November the 8th, 2013, when Typhoon Haiyan moved inland, and here we are again pretty much at that hour now. Ridiculous intensity, unrivaled in any of the time that we've been watching, especially at that part of the Philippines as well, that far south. Who else is with us then? Isaac. I'm sorry, let me just fade you up here. Oh, lost my buttons. Go ahead.
Well, I remember tracking that storm. It was around when I first kind of really got serious into tracking storms. And ironically, I was watching Force 13 updates when I was looking at it. I kept on refreshing the page because it used to have those intensity things go up, and I saw it go from a tropical storm, a typhoon, then a Cat 4, then a 5, and then I thought maybe it'll peak about the same as you did, maybe 175, maybe
Right.
165, something like that, and then it went all the way over to 195, pretty much at landfall. And then I remember thinking to myself, this is going to be like a major catastrophe for the poor people on the islands of the Philippines over there in Leyte and Tacloban and areas around that general region of impact. And
Just
because of Haiyan,
bringing us
go
back
ahead.
there to that infrared imagery, you can just see how the storm was looking as it was peaking there. The quality isn't the best, but it's the only copy that I'm aware of this part of this particular floater imagery of the storm as it was peaking. Do you think it peaked? Do you think it did weaken ever so slightly just before the landfall?
Looking at IR, it looked like it slightly did weaken, but even if it did weaken or not,
Yeah.
still an absolutely major impact on the Philippines, no matter what.
There it goes.
And I believe also because of Haiyan, the warnings there weren't really a lot of good warnings in effect, and they weren't really taking it as seriously as they do now. And because of Haiyan, a lot of the officials over in the Philippines have really stepped up their game in terms of warnings and evacuations. And I believe when Typhoon Hagapit the year after in 2014,
2014, yeah.
yeah, that was also poised to possibly be somewhat of a more northerly Haiyan. Thankfully, it didn't. It weakened to, I believe, a Cat 3 at
Yes,
landfall,
I
if I'm not
do.
mistaken.
I do very well remember that one, and that one was a bit of a let-off, wasn't it? Still struck as a pretty powerful typhoon, but wasn't it touted by the JTWC that was going to make landfall at least as a Cat 5, but maybe with some on top again as well.
Yeah, I think it was forecast to make a 175-mile-an-hour landfall, if I'm not mistaken. Thankfully, it didn't. And
In
when
the
that
same
storm
region.
came through, they improved their warning system and their evacuations. And before the storm came through, they evacuated, I believe, up to 100,000 or 300,000 people, some number like that. That I heard were evacuated in advance from the storm. And now they've improved their kind of warning system now, thankfully. So if another high end happens, they're more prepared to handle the situation.
Farm, do you agree with that prognosis from Isaac? Is the Philippines more ready for a Haiyan today than it was in 2013? Is he still there? Okay, perhaps
It's not muted.
David, do you have any recollections of the storm?
No, I don't, but I did have a
Were
look
you?
at the 3-year anniversary video,
We did do one for that, yes.
and I want to ask Nathan, it made landfall 6 times?
It made a lot of landfalls. Obviously, the Philippines, a massive islands. It can be very easy to be a bit disingenuous with those landfall statistics, because you get one after the other. When compared to other storms, people may think, oh wow, it made 6 landfalls, but other storms could do more damage whilst making only 1 landfall. But obviously, needless to say, this was the most impactful storm in the Philippines in the records. I think it's either the deadliest or the second deadliest in the Philippines. I can't remember what the first part of our production said. And I think it was the deadliest in the Philippines, and the 8th strongest storm according to Force 13's records in the Western Pacific in all of history. So that is pretty darn impressive.
Nathan, when you look back on this system, how would you compare it to the recent lot of Cat 5 typhoons?
I guess that's a pretty pertinent question as well. Typhoon Mangkhut made landfall earlier this year, Category 5, 180, some people might call it. I think we've now gone with 175 on Force 13's reanalysis of that storm. Either way, very powerful Category 5 storm, although it has to be said, in fact you can even see it on this map, I think. You sort of see the crude lighting on the cities, how unpopulated the eastern coast of Luzon is, and there's a few cities down on Leyte and Samar, so there was more population affected by the worst part of Haiyan than there was for Typhoon Mangkhut. And of course Typhoon Haiyan was so much stronger with, I assume, a much larger wind field.
Nathan,
or a much larger
just,
typhoon wind field.
Just looking at some information, the local name for Haiyan was Yolanda. And
Yolanda.
Yes.
Fatalities,
Philippine name Yolanda.
6,340. And it was...
I think actually it got over 7,000 in the end.
So...
Don't know, but it's somewhere like 6,000 or 7,000.
The super typhoons continue to increase when you factor in the ones we've had this season.
I mean, I think this is something that, you could take into consideration with it, is that, it could have weakened us very slightly at the end, right before landfall. But I feel like we're starting to get into a phase where we're seeing more and more intensify as they get into landfall. This year we had Michael and Mangkhut intensify as they headed into landfall. We had Harvey last year. Are we starting to see a pattern where more and more storms don't really weaken as much before they make landfall?
Yeah.
Nathan, the Guardian.com is reporting an article on the typhoon 5 years on. And as we know, the death toll more than 7,360. It damaged or swept away more than 1.1 million houses, injured more than 27,000 people, more than 4 million people were displaced.
These are very familiar numbers, very similar numbers to what I have in the tables. Over 1 million buildings were damaged or destroyed. The only storm in the Western Pacific that did more than that was Typhoon Vera in 1959 when it struck Japan. I think one or two other storms elsewhere may have that beat. I can't remember. Possibly in the Indian Ocean. But, it's a very high number, a very high toll. Unparalleled for this latitude, as it were. Let's just see if there's any questions here. There was a question that came in earlier, kind of related to Haiyan in terms of intensity. Do you think U2 peaked at 190 miles per hour? No.
Anyone else think that it did?
At what?
No.
You two
And,
for 190?
No, and we were talking about
no.
it because we weren't just looking at satellite appearance and wind damage and such, but the pressure readings we got from Saipan and Guam before they went out as well, for some reason would indicate
Well,
a storm that had a pressure of the...
We'll have to see if they find any more data on that before we talk too loudly about it. Some more
You know, you wouldn't really
images.
expect to see this be 200 miles an hour. This wouldn't be what we would say is stronger than a Haiyan, especially because it didn't hold the appearance for as long either.
So, I assume that everyone here either tracked it at the time or has read up a lot on it since the storm happened. The pressure. This is a sticking point with a lot of people. Officially, or according to the JTWC, and I think JMA did agree on it, 895 millibars. It's too high, surely.
Well, Nathan, I just posted an image of the Eva Jocelyn. It's a ship, and and the debris around it. It looks like it really got washed up. I'm not sure of the location, but I would have to say, agree with you that the intensity would have to be a lot lower for this sort of destruction.
Yeah, that was another key factor in the sad amount of deaths going on with the Haiyan was storm surge. The storm surge, you got to understand, the storm was moving at a relatively fast pace. I think it was in and out of Tacloban in about 3 hours or something around there. It was moving pretty fast. But you got to take into account the storm surge is also really devastating. If the winds weren't bad enough, the storm surge made it even worse. I posted a link in chat earlier of just the absolutely astounding storm surge that came through. It was pretty much survivors were describing it pretty much as like a tsunami of water going into the cities and towns that were exposed to the ocean, and people's accounts of survival and all that is just absolutely amazing. What a storm could do.
Does anyone agree with the 895 millibar estimate on the storm?
No, I think it's too high.
It has to be lower.
I would say it's lower too, slightly lower.
Frank, what do you think?
Well, Haiyan was pretty much one of the most destructive storms and most intense and strongest I've ever seen since I've been tracking in 2011. I remember seeing on television the amount of destruction caused by the storm and the storm surge. I remember thinking that surely a huge amount of lives have been lost that day, and certainly there has been.
I'll never forget the Philippine name of the storm.
Yes.
Yeah, it was. It was unreal to me because I haven't seen anything like that in my life.
Devon, I think a lot of people value your opinion on these storms. I mean, you've done your analyses on other significant West Pacific systems, one or two that have raised eyebrows. Your thoughts on Haiyan at peak?
Well, at least at my first time reviewing the storm, I had it down at peak. Not at landfall, not peaking at landfall, but I believe peaking 6 hours before landfall.
That's about right.
At winds maximum 1 minute sustained wind speed of 200 miles per hour, 322 kilometers per hour, and an estimated minimum central pressure using the wind pressure relationship that I got off of a 2005 paper brings it to roughly 877 millibars.
So you'd actually go with that, yeah?
That's my stance on it. And
Force 13's analysis pretty close, 879.
until I see evidence to the contrary. I'm sticking to my observations.
If you've got any questions for us regarding Haiyan on this special 5-year anniversary broadcast, I sort of felt we ought to have done something for this because it is a landmark, and it's something that one of the events that people are going to remember for a very long time. Who knows? We'll probably do another one for Patricia when that gets to 5 years. And if you've got any comments or questions for us, do send them in. Even if it is maybe not completely related, we'll take them anyway, as long as it doesn't go too far beyond the pale. Do you think it was possible... Okay, well, this is a question we sort of answered, but do you think it was possible that Haiyan could have had a 200-mile-an-hour wind speed? We think so, Devon thinks so. Does everyone else here think so, or do we have other people who think maybe not?
It's pretty reasonable.
It is
I would
definitely
say-
possible.
Yeah.
I'll support that too. And Nathan, before you continue, I'd just like to draw viewers' attention to our live broadcasting. We're going out on Facebook.
Yes.
And Nathan, I have this posting for Roderick Mendoza.
Go ahead.
Team All Bay then was the first multi-role group of rescuers who dashed Luzon Islands to Tacloban. We reached that location with all crew and equipment in about 11 hours after the devastation. We were overwhelmed by the sea of distraction, dead bodies everywhere along the way. We literally cut our way into the Visayas from Luzon with very large trees along the way, as well as all sort of debris. Luckily, our chainsaws and 4x4s did not give up.
What an effort they must have made to get through there.
Yep. And looking at the article on The Guardian, that I posted in the in our room.
We weren't able to see that, so I'm not sure how much impact it will have.
The imagery was graphic, the debris and that ship. So the winds would have to be extremely strong. I know we commented about storm surge and that central pressure, but what the most deadliest or the second deadliest super typhoon?
Alright, more questions here. How much damage did Haiyan do in mainland Asia? I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I think it was quite a few 100 million in the end, wasn't it?
Something like that.
Sounds about right, but it wouldn't be as much as the Philippines, of course, because it was...
That's Tyler. Good morning or evening to you.
Yep, evening over here.
Your take on Haiyan, you agree with the... I mean, that is pretty much the biggest debating point after the fact. As meteorologists sitting here around this virtual roundtable, in that, how strong was the storm actually? And isn't it a travesty that we have to be kept guessing because there are no direct observations?
Yeah, it's... It was a very impressive storm. On satellite imagery, actually on screen right now, I have a comparison between the Katrina and Haiyan. But that's besides the point.
Katrina and Haiyan. Well, that is the first thing that Joe Public will jump to, I suppose. Well, they won't now because they'll be jumping between Irma and goodness knows what else, Michael. And but yeah, I mean, Katrina's getting a bit dated, but that's what they would have compared to at the time. I can't see it though. What you're showing us.
Yeah, I wasn't screen sharing, but let me slap that on screen.
Let's just get this up here.
I know we were talking about, we'll never really know the intensity. Someone asked in the chat earlier, do we think recon will ever come back to the Western Pacific?
I don't see it being America's recon.
Do you think other countries will invest in it eventually? Do you think Japan will invest in it? Do you think China will?
I could
or
see
will China be left with satellite imagery?
Hold on a minute, one at a time. Devon, please. Say again?
Japan and China are definite no's.
Well, that doesn't leave much else.
Japan were thinking about it, and I don't know if they've made a decision or not, but I thought they were going to be doing it this year or the year before that. And go ahead.
Even if Japan ends up doing these recon flights, they aren't going to release the data to the public. So
yeah,
we still don't have access to whatever data they might have.
Another thing that I heard about it is that if they were to do it, they would only fly in the storms that are no stronger than about 150 miles an hour.
Right.
I think due to aircraft limitations.
That's right. On the screen here, again, is a comparison between Haiyan on the left and Hurricane Katrina on the right. Katrina, you can
really
see, had a larger eye,
difference.
but go ahead.
Yeah, actually, this was Katrina at its strongest. When Katrina made landfall, it was a weakening Category 3, and the southern part of the eye wall right here had actually opened, while Haiyan looked pretty much like this at landfall.
Haiyan did decay actually in appearance quite a bit before landfall. The eye was beginning to shrink as it came ashore.
But which landfall?
Yeah, but
the cloud tops were also warming. It weakened at least a good 10 miles an hour before coming ashore.
You do know that the
but
eye
Katrina
struck
weakened like 40 almost.
You do know that the eye struck the extreme southern tip of Samar.
Yes, that is counting the extreme southern tip of
So you're
Samar.
counting that landfall? Yeah, I do think it weakened by maybe 1 or 2%, but really very little before that first landfall. And then a lot more by the time it reached Tacloban, but still Category 5 easily.
And another thing that I would like to say is the image on the left is enlarged. Haiyan was actually a lot smaller than that. Pretty much in between the size of, say, Hurricane Michael and Hurricane Katrina, but Haiyan was actually a little bit smaller than what's depicted there.
And different satellites being used as well too.
Well, they had the same resolution, I think. That was
somewhat.
That was so you have the one on the left. That's a GOES 13 image, I think, and the one on the right is a GOES 13 image, and the one on the left would have been what, GMS 7?
Metsat 1.
Metsat.
Metsat 1.
Cover... Oh, MTSat.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
MTSat.
Yeah. I got it confused.
MTSat 2 would have been the image on the left.
I have never heard of that satellite.
Yeah. Well, that was what was in between the GMS and Himawari.
Yeah, before they called it Himawari.
Well,
when they replaced
Himawari's a completely different satellite.
Yeah, they replaced it in 2015 from that satellite to Himawari 8, and then Himawari 9 and 20 something.
I believe Typhoon Newell was actually one of the first storms that we got images for Himawari.
And here's another remarkable fact on Haiyan versus Katrina. If you amount damage in terms of actual structures and buildings that were affected by each storm, Haiyan actually affected almost 10 times as many as Katrina. So that's a lot more individuals that were probably affected by Haiyan versus Katrina. Of course, Katrina did kill almost 2,000.
Yeah, someone asked in chat. I think this can somewhat relate to how many people it impacted. Which was more costly between Katrina and Haiyan?
That's really not worth comparing because the buildings that were damaged.
It is an unfair comparison, yes.
Because
Katrina hit a major city and
it hit a much more well-developed area. It's obviously more developed.
More developed, more money to be destroyed.
It's just that there's a lot more costly stuff to destroy in New Orleans than there is to destroy in Tacloban City.
Yeah.
Now, I just want to bring up something else of interest. It was touched upon earlier on in at the very beginning during my piece, but looking back at history, there is only one storm that could come anywhere near Haiyan in the historical record, I'm just about to load that up on the screen right now so that we can talk about it a little bit, and just what the return rate is for storms like these, in your opinions. I'm just trying to locate that image in the extensive archive that has been being built in the Western Pacific in the last
I'm gonna take
year
a
or so.
guess and say Typhoon 2.
No, that didn't hit the Philippines.
No, we're not. Well, no, that's not what I. Okay, so we're comparing storms to the Philippines.
Yes,
Okay.
that's the general aim. I can't find it. We'll get that on shortly, but yeah, the question that I'll be alluding to is the return rate for a storm like Haiyan to strike not exactly the same area, but say the southern half of the Philippines, just as Haiyan did.
Maybe once every 100 years or something like that, if I'm not
It's
mistaken.
an
But
interesting
I don't, I'm
question,
not,
and we don't really know the answer because
yeah,
We
because
don't
We
I-
haven't really
we don't have
we
enough
don't have enough
records.
data.
Look at this. This
Exactly.
is Typhoon 21 in November 1912. This storm struck a very similar area as a Category 5, we expect. A pressure of 919 millibars, probably peaked before it struck land. It injured up to 15,000, killed at least 115. There could be inaccuracies in those numbers because things how they were reported back in those days can be very misleading. But that is just a very interesting context there on a very similar storm to Haiyan, a very similar time of year, 101 years difference. And that is the closest I've seen to anything like Haiyan in the whole entire record. The only other one you could probably look at is something like one of those storms that struck land in the 70s or 80s as a Category 4. But, you know...
Angela, maybe?
No, I think I was thinking of something like, was it Kate?
Ike.
And Ike in 1984. Ike wasn't as strong, but Category 5 landfalls in this area exceedingly rare.
Yes.
But I just thought I'd show that as a matter of interest. A very the most similar storm to Haiyan that could be found, basically. And it's not
Now,
particularly similar.
It's obviously very rare for these super strong storms to maintain intensity all the way to landfall. That is just extremely unprecedented. It's not something that we've seen a lot of storms end up doing. But if you take a look at the area just off the coast of the Philippines, you take a look at maybe 10 degrees, maybe even as close as 5 degrees to the east of the Philippines, and that's where you see a lot of very, very strong storms end up developing. I mean, Bofa ended up spinning up in that area. You had Typhoon Vera spinning up in that area. You had Typhoon Mike spinning up in that area. And that's 3 very, very strong storms right there, even though they're spread out by quite a bit. So it's an area that's known to be able to sustain very, very strong systems. And usually they're quite small. However, one of them actually coming ashore in the Philippines, I mean, you gotta figure that it can't be more common than once per 50 years.
Hagapit almost did it as well, but it mercifully weakened a lot before it struck and did the stalling motion, and we were really worried that it was going to do like another Category 5 landfall in the Visayas region of the Philippines, not even 13 months after after Haiyan. So there's some imagery that we're looping through here. More questions. Do you think there will ever be an Atlantic Haiyan? Great Hurricane of 1780 is probably your closest bet.
I would counter that and say the 1935 Keys Hurricane.
We could go down any rabbit hole with that discussion, I think.
But there are
New England Labor Day.
I mean,
in the meteorological community that state that the 1935 Labor Day hurricane could have been as strong as 200 miles an hour. If you want to believe that, go ahead. But it is very was at least 185
Yeah.
miles an hour.
And
upon
people
landfall.
wanted to talk about Patricia comparisons. Strat, your thoughts on that?
Don't throw me into this.
You wanted to speak, so I was going to let you in.
Alright.
You're
I
being
think there's
thrown under the bus.
two completely different areas of the world. For one, Patricia was able to weaken at a much quicker pace, specifically because of its land proximity in terms of the mountainous terrain. Drier, because of that increasing shear, was able to just completely destroy it, while Haiyan had a more favorable environment as it approached landfall in general. Also because throughout its whole track, the time of year especially, and considering it's the Western Pacific, you're going to have more ocean heat content to work with in general as well. And that's why you tend to see the strongest storms typically we end up seeing in the Western Pacific rather than anywhere else in the world. So for seeing a high end in the Atlantic at least, or get a really strong storm that maintains Category 5 for a really long time, it's much harder to come across in the Atlantic because, the only time you'll have multiple days without much land interaction to really do that is if you're out in the open Atlantic, main development region. Because, when we see Category 5s in the Atlantic, they're in the Gulf of Mexico or Caribbean, usually land can be close by, and that means they can't really maintain intensity as long. So the closest you're going to get to a high end is probably going to be a weaker version of it in terms of intensity, and that's just going to be Irma because it was able to maintain its intensity for so long. You're not going to see anything else remotely similar to it, probably for multiple generations potentially.
Devon,
Although to note, climate change is making impacts for sure, so it could be more likely as we go on.
Devon, Patricia versus Haiyan.
Well, it's pretty simple to say here about Patricia versus Haiyan. Patricia is probably even more of a freak storm than Haiyan ever wishes that it could be. Like I said, we've seen multiple 190-mile-an-hour plus systems develop where Haiyan ended up developing in even around a similar time of year as well. So that's not necessarily too surprising. Patricia, on the other hand, is miles above anything else. I mean, this blows Linda out of the ballpark. And data for the Eastern Pacific storms, because they're all confined to such a small area of formation and they all tend to go out to sea, don't really have any good data on them at all. So if it happened, there could have been a storm like Patricia in the 60s. We would have never known about it.
And that's the thing about saying, we've just witnessed the strongest storm ever. We've got no idea in what percentile this storm actually is. Well, it might be in the top 1%, but we don't know if it's in the top 0.1%, do we?
Exactly.
Something just occurred to me, back when this is going far back, we don't have any records on this, but back when there was Pangea and the rest of the world was an ocean, imagine the hurricanes that would have.
Actually, that
if the wind shear didn't.
Actually, that would decrease hurricane intensity. Having all the continents jammed up at one point will shut down ocean currents, and that will actually make it difficult for hurricanes to form.
Interesting.
Good point. Yeah, well, it would make hurricanes more more difficult to form the Atlantic for sure because the Gulf Stream.
If you take a look at Force 13 Hyperworld, you've got all of the land jammed up in one area, and there's two central mini continents.
No one will know what you're talking about now.
I know, but I'm just saying, a world like that where there's a lot of land jammed up in one place, the ocean currents aren't going to be looping around all over the place, and you're not going to be able to see hurricanes really form that way.
So here's a question that I think might have been directed to you, perhaps, Devon. I don't know, but if anyone else wants to pick up on it, they can. Do you think Haiyan is as strong as the 1935 Labor Day hurricane, or probably stronger?
That's only speculation at that point. I haven't seen any evidence for the Labor Day hurricane to be stronger than 185 miles an hour.
Would everyone agree with that?
By default, Haiyan's stronger.
Yeah, so there's some more imagery of Haiyan. We also want to mention for a little while, whilst we're on the air tonight, of the actual storm situation that we do have ongoing. We have Cyclone Alcide, which is located in the southwest Indian Ocean. This is current, and it is moving towards the southwest. It has strengthened markedly in the last few hours. We believe it's at Category 3 status, barely 115 miles per hour, and I don't see any reason to upgrade it any further anytime soon, given how the storm's looking in these latest frames. A decent eye has popped out there with some very deep convection around the storm. This could increase the threat to land for maybe the northern tip of Madagascar and some of the southernmost of the outer group of the Seychelles. But apart from that, very little land areas should be affected by this system, and it's still very compact. I don't know if anyone wants to just pick up on that briefly.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm just
shit.
waiting for the zero set information to come out.
Alright. Well, of course we'll have more updates on this storm, Cyclone Alcide. This is the southwest Indian Ocean, not far from the northeastern coast of Madagascar, well to the north of Mauritius and La Réunion. Again, that is another look at the storm. The first named storm in that basin for this upcoming season. We'll have an update on that in about just an hour after we finish this show, at the top of the hour. So those in Mauritius and beyond, sit tight. We'll have an update on that for you soon. So, if you've just joined us, we've been speaking for the last 45 minutes about Typhoon Haiyan. It's 5 years to the day since the storm made landfall in the Philippines, pretty much to the hour. I don't know exactly the time that the storm made landfall. I could probably find out pretty easily. It happened about 2 hours ago. 5 years and 2 hours ago. Was the landfall in Tacloban, at least. Its first landfall on some of those islands off the southern tip of Samar, that occurred a little bit earlier. Is Farm here at all? Apparently he's still indicating that he's still here. It would appear not. Let's see, there's some more questions in that case. What's the strongest off-season Southwest Indian Ocean storm? Oh, goodness knows. I've no idea. I've not been doing research on that recently. I would assume that is before November. And after April.
What are we talking about?
Off-season storms in the Southwest Indian Ocean. We don't have an answer for that. We haven't done enough research in that area. All of our research at the moment is concentrated towards the West Pac, at least in our analysis. But if we do get an answer for you, we'll hit you with it. Do you think the 1780 hurricane could be stronger than Haiyan?
Which one?
The 1780 hurricane. No idea of knowing. No idea.
There's absolutely no same thing with the 1935 hurricane. There's absolutely no evidence to
For or
suggest
against.
it. So
Speculatory right now.
there's not even an official intensity for it.
Yeah.
No, yeah, that's
we
right.
don't know.
So I will say this though, because I think this is worth saying. Let me pull this up to make sure that I'm like 100% sure here.
What are we pulling up?
Talking about like potential for where are we going to see, the most intense storms in the Atlantic. And if we take a look at, the storms that have gotten underneath 900 millibars, 3 of them achieved that in the Western Caribbean. One of them was and the other 2 were moving through the Florida Strait. So that's clearly the conductive area for intensification for very, very strong storms in the Atlantic. It's not necessarily way out at sea, and it's not in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico in the loop currents per se. A lot of very strong storms tend to occur in the Western Caribbean. Wilma, Gilbert, Allen, Mitch, Dean, the 1924 Cuba hurricane. I think Ivan peaked there, Janet. You know, the list goes on and on, to say the least, for those very intense hurricanes that peaked in the Western Caribbean.
Now, this isn't a question that's come up in the comments, but it's one that has sprung to me, and I'm curious to ask everyone present about the Western Pacific season this year, because we have seen quite a few Category 5s. I think, I'm not sure if it's the most amount of Cat 5s we've seen since 1997, but it must come close. And what you make of it, whether you're surprised, whether you expected it. Any takers on that one?
I mean, there certainly were a lot of Cat 5s. I think you are, if I'm not mistaken, I haven't researched or whatever, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe we are correct on that. This is like the most amount of Cat 5s we've seen in the Western Pacific since '97, unless some 1960s or '70s season had
or
more.
Maybe 2015. I don't know.
2015
maybe.
definitely. I count 6.
What are we up to this year? Can't even remember.
6.
We're tied with 2015.
So we have Maria.
Yeah, Maria.
Let me
Jebby.
Yeah, so Maria was the first one. That was all the way back in July. And then the rest of them have all occurred in this recent bunch with Jebby, Mangkut, Trammy, Kongray, and U2.
It's quite a list.
And with the exception of Bajirat, that would make it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 consecutive named systems becoming Category 5s.
I don't think that even happened in the 1950s.
Well, that's excluding Bajirat.
There was still 3 in a row, weren't there?
Yeah, that kind of ends that. But we do have 3 consecutive named storms becoming Category 5s, which I think also happened in '97 with Ivan, Joan, and Keith.
Might have been, actually, yeah.
Well, what was the question again?
You said 3 consecutive Cat 5s, right?
Yeah.
Ooh.
I can't remember if there was one in between or not.
No, there's not one in between. It's Ivan, Joan, Keith.
Right, well, there you go.
Ooh. Wow.
Remarkable. But thankfully, not quite as bad as what Haiyan did. Hopefully there's still not time for it, because sometimes these things can happen in December. Of course, Bhopal the previous year was at the first week of December. Very low latitude storm, that one as well.
Well, Paka, did that even affect land?
Guam.
Guam. Well,
as a Cat 4.
Guess that counts as yeah, I guess that counts as land. My bad.
Yeah,
Sorry,
didn't make it to the
Philippines.
Yeah, definitely. You better apologize.
Wow. I
thought you were talking about December super typhoons. My bad. Just like in general.
Well, yeah, you cannot count out a very strong storm forming in that very powerful region, just 5 to 10 degrees east of the Philippines and like south of 10 degrees north. A lot of storms love to really blow up in that region.
But you know, yes, but they're usually moving much further in a northerly direction. There's plenty of examples of that. But you know, I think the most the hottest place for Category 5 landfalls is Luzon, isn't it?
Yeah, Luzon. Well, Luzon already had one this year.
Yeah, and Luzon has had one. Could have been 2 if U2 got its act together. Thank goodness it didn't. and just off the coast of Luzon, a few hundred miles, is literally the cyclone hotspot of the world.
Yep.
Just a few hundred miles east of the northern part of Luzon. That is where most storms have passed through in history. So that is quite a statistic. In case you were wondering, for the Atlantic, if you look at the Atlantic basin alone, the hotspot is actually off the coast of North Carolina.
That shouldn't be surprising to anybody that knows anything about the Atlantic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I would guess.
A lot of people gasp. Not Florida? Or the Caribbean?
No, not Florida. A lot of Cape Verde storms, they tend to bunch up going in between North Carolina and Bermuda, and there's been a lot of those fish. There's a lot of them, at least one a year.
Someone has asked us to compare Haiyan to Nancy. That might be quite difficult.
Nancy?
What?
Yes.
Ugh.
Recon messed up in Nancy? About the only thing I could say.
And Recon wasn't there for Haiyan.
Yeah.
Those are your comparisons.
Well, you see, when the thing about Haiyan is that the recon wasn't there, so the recon didn't mess up. There you go.
They weren't
Just
given
ignore
the
the fact that there was
opportunity.
no recon. Just ignore that fact, and there's a 100% success.
Yeah.
You cut out.
Cut out on something. We got the gist.
All right.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Cut out on my end.
Any other comments? Because we're about to wrap things up here. I hope it's been a nice discussion that people have enjoyed watching. I hope we've done the storm justice on this 5-year anniversary. We don't do them very often at all, because I think only the most significant storms deserve to get these sorts of coverage long after the fact. If you were doing storm anniversaries, you'd be doing one every day almost.
Yep.
I'm curious to see if anybody in the chat went through Typhoon Haiyan personally, and if they're able to quickly relate, their story to us. That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, we did have a comment near the start about that.
Really?
On Facebook, but
Oh.
yeah, we should have asked more about that for people on the ground who have had these experiences, and Farm was there as well to talk a little bit about it too. We're hoping to have someone, one of his friends on here as well, to talk about the impacts of this storm too. If he's watching after the live stream is finished, then it's a shame we couldn't have you on. Hopefully next time, but it is still fresh in a lot of people's minds, of course.
Exactly, yeah. And a lot of lessons have been learned since then, since the storm happened, and now people are more prepared in a way when storms go through that general region. Like we saw with the Ruby, people were way more prepared than they were with Haiyan.
Well, there we are. I guess that's everything. Let's just see if we've got any... a few people saying things there as well. Storm surge. Oh, what is the date for the 2018 hurricane season animation? That's a very good question. I cannot tell you the answer at this moment in time, I'm afraid.
January 1st. Kidding.
It's going to be earlier than January the 1st, unless we've got storms until January the 1st.
Well, we could easily have another Malor.
Not in the Atlantic.
Not in the Atlantic.
No, I looked at the sheer graph for the Atlantic, and it's just 50 knots everywhere,
Really?
all over the place. I'm just yeah, there's no hurricane.
Awesome. Sounds
There
good.
was a
Hopefully-
little pocket east of Florida where there was no shear, and the rest of the country, it was just a mess.
And that's where the next
rest of
storm will form, no doubt. All right.
Awesome. So hopefully that persists through all next season, and we have 2 seasons in the 2010s that had no hurricanes.
Hey,
That'd be awesome.
we gotta go. We hope you enjoyed this feature.
Stay tuned if your interests lie with Mauritius or Madagascar or anywhere around that area, because there is an update coming up in 1 hour's time on the Force 13 channel about Cyclone Alcide, which is now according to us, a Category 3 storm with winds of 115 miles per hour. We'll have an update on that shortly. We'll have regular updates on all of our social platforms. Until next time, team, thank you very much for joining me tonight, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you again very soon indeed. That's it from our 5-year commemorative show on Haiyan, and let's hope we don't see anything like that again anytime soon. Here's hoping, fingers crossed. Good night. Or good morning, as the case may be.
Hope is a dangerous drug.